No one else.
Sorry. Okay.
Deputy Connolly for 10 minutes. Because
Oh, yeah. I can't call it. Minister, I welcome the opportunity to make a contribution to this, although sometimes I tire listening to my own voice, but I'm not here for myself. I'm here for those who are feeling absolute exasperation on the ground, and I admit from at the outset that I have a particular personal interest besides a professional interest in the past. I want to welcome that there's going to be a report in March. And I want to welcome that you've gone for the full forensic examination of the tomb site. I welcome those two things. However, I do not welcome the way that this has been handled, and that it was published on the 9th of January by Patsy McGarry in the Irish Times that there was an extension being sought. I don't know who's responsible for that, Minister, but I'm afraid you have to carry the can, because that's not the way it should have been done. I don't know how it got out. Clearly the Independent Commission couldn't have done it. So, I mean, if one is saying the Independent Commission did this, that's serious. I presume they did not. So who did this? How did this get out in this manner? And have we learned nothing? And I think it's important to go back and just do the timeline for this. And I was about to say approximately 800 children remains were found, and I thought, how wrong of me to do something like that. 796 remains, and it's extremely important, by Catherine Corliss in 2014. And that work was by her. Not easy, and I'm not going to go back into it, but that was the beginning point. And what we're doing here is uncovering the layers of secrecy in Irish society and the layers of shame that have been heaped upon women after women. I often wonder how we as women came sane out of this, or how we have any sort of sanity left in the way that we were treated. And I certainly came up in that background, I have to say, certainly the tail end of it. And so we have the brave work of Catherine Corliss, and then we finally have some action from the government on the 4th of June 2004, and when the government announced it was bringing together representatives from various organisations and so on, and that an inquiry would take place on the 16th of July 2014. No, that's 4 years ago. More than 4 years ago. The government announced that Judge John Yvonne Murphy would chair a commission, and so on. I won't go into to it, we know it. But my difficulty is that deadlines were given from day one and the deadlines were never met. And so we had a foolishness in relation to a confidential committee report, a social history report, and then a substantial report. All of the deadlines missed. Now you can imagine, Minister, on something as important as this, that trust is of the utmost. There was no trust. Couldn't even trust the birth certs nor the death certs. We could trust nothing. The people that I stand here for had no trust in anything. And then we set up a commission, and there's no trust either in the process of reporting on that commission, and deadline after deadline. And when up to the final request to extend it another year, up to 2020. Now, the first interim report in July just concerned the revision of the time frame for the reports. There was no change to the statement in relation to costs or anything like that, and that was agreed to. The second interim report is a little bit more important, and they focused, and they did suggest something and did make a recommendation to the government, which he duly ignored. Again, trust gone out the window. Substitute given to the Minister on September the 16th. Published in April 17. Again, no explanation for that delay. Absolutely no explanation for that delay. No understanding as to what that caused to the people on the ground in terms of confidence. And the report very clearly said that those babies and children who were unaccompanied, a distinction I don't agree with, let me say for the record, but I could see where they were coming from in their that they should not be distinguished from those who had received redress under the redress board, those people who had spent time in institutions. That was something practical, that if you wanted to show good faith and restore confidence, to actually deal with that, deal with the implications of that, rather than a glib, the redress board time has closed. That was a golden opportunity to say, okay, this is something. It didn't happen. The third interim report was submitted in September 17, published in December 17, Again, an inexplicable delay. And that was to request a year's extension of time. And we gave them that, and ye gave them that in our name. And then finally, the fourth interim report. Now, what strikes me when I look at that is, how could all of these extensions of time go ahead? And the amount of work, and I accept it's complex, I accept there's a pile of documentation, but there has been no increase in, no request for an increase in resources, or staff, or money. How could that happen? It was set up for a specific period of time. It's gone way over that time, and yet there's no request for any increase in funding. That's very strange to me. The fourth report stated that it's expected that all the meetings with individuals will be completed by January 19. We're in February. Has that happened? More alarming, of course, was the revelation in the report that extensive material provided by the Department of Health and the Department of Children and Youth Affairs had only recently been provided to the Commission, with more, I think, of the blame on the Health Executive, if that's the appropriate word. Again, what are the reasons for this? The Commission has been ongoing for 4 years and only changed the documentation. It's not clear why there was a delay in giving it and whether all documentation has been given. The terms of reference, as I said, go way back. And yet in the fourth report, 2 years later, after the first tranche of documents were received, specifically the first tranche of discovery was delivered in March 17. This consisted of over 12,000 pages. The second tranche was delivered in March 18 and consisted of over 54,000 pages, and so on. And specifically in relation to the Health Executive, the Commission, the report said it's difficult to understand how relatively recent documentation is not available. For example, the North Western Health Board and subsequently the Health Executive was intensely involved in the running of one of the institutions under investigation, and it mentions that and goes on. Have you an answer for that? I mean, is there an answer somewhere for that in relation to specific documentation? I'm going to draw to a conclusion by once again looking at file note, confidential briefing documents that I have repeatedly highlighted in this chamber. And so every government for the last number of years have been utterly aware that something was seriously wrong in relation to mother and baby homes throughout the country. And a lot of that documentation and knowledge came from the Martin McAleese inquiry in relation to the Magdalen laundries. But it wasn't his brief to look at that, but all of the information came to the surface, which is a bad choice of words maybe, came to the surface. And a very good social worker working on her own time, and this is all outlined in this, which you are privy to, and which this government and the previous governments were privy to. It's outlined the principal social worker for adoption in the West is working in her own time. This is a record of what they knew at the time. She's working in her own time and on her own dollar, which is an interesting choice, dollar, bearing in mind where our children went to try and piece together a bundle of information. She already has a database of up to 1,000 names, but it's not clear yet whether all of these relate to the ongoing examination of the Magdalen laundry or whether they relate to the adoption of children by parents, possibly in the UA, and she's going on. And it goes on that it goes right up for the information of the person in charge. This may prove to be a scandal that dwarfs others, more recent issues with the church and state. And so on and so on. Serious questions about interference with death certs, serious questions about interference with birth certs. And so we get a commission of investigation, Minister, and we get unacceptable delays. And I have to say we get a lot of padding from yourself in relation to collaborative justice. Now, certainly as somebody who has been affected by this, but not as much as those who have closer relatives, I don't want filling on collaborative justice. And the people on the ground who have spoken to me do not want filling out. What they want is knowledge, information at regular intervals to empower them, because that was the one thing that happened. They were disempowered, and the system is continuing to disempower them and to patronise them. And I don't think you should stand over that, and I really don't think you're the type of person that will stand over that, but unfortunately that's what's happened. Patronising, disempowerment continues by the very mechanisms that have been set up to undo what was happened in the past. So at this point, I would ask, if we learn anything, publish the report when it becomes available in March as quickly as possible. Have an interim report in the meantime on the substantive nature of what has been discovered by the Commission. I see no reason why an interim substantive report cannot be published. And no more communication through the Irish Times. However, notwithstanding my respect for the paper, communication should be direct with the people on the ground, and any report that comes into your hand should come into this stall within a matter of hours or days, depending on the schedule of the Dáil, and no more 3- and 6-month delays. That's how you will restore confidence in the system and empower people on the ground.
Thank you, Deputy.